Good morning, brothers and sisters.
Good morning.
Our readings this Sunday are all about love and the commandments of God, right? Ultimately, we know, as Christ teaches us, that the greatest command is to love. And as we hear in the Gospel, that is first to love God with your whole heart, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. So this is the essence of the command. So whenever there is law given to us by Christ in the Scriptures, the law ultimately has to do with love itself. It's all about love. This is true. But love always seeks to follow the commands of God, the laws of God, because they work together, law and love, truth and love. You can't have one without the other. Last week I spoke to you about the synod and some of the controversies that have been stirred up and various difficulties that we have in the church. And I reminded you that the church's teachings, or moral teachings, or teachings on Christ and the faith, don't change. Our understanding may deepen, certain practices can be altered over the centuries, but the teachings themselves don't change. They can't change. They have never changed, they will never change. That is the truth that is handed to us from Christ. The question then is, what is the purpose of the synod if it's not to change stuff, right? If it's not supposed to change anything, what's the point? Let's just keep doing what we're doing, and bishops don't have to go around to me. Our Holy Father, at the end of this extraordinary synod, wrote a closing address, and I encourage you, if you did not get a chance, to print it out. It's only a couple of pages long. And he's trying to express not only some of the challenges that are clearly expressed in this synod that came from it, or happened in it, but he's also trying to remind us of the purpose of the synod. But I wanted to read to you just two short points that he makes in this address, referencing two problems that came out of the synod, or that were stirred up in the synod itself. So again, he's talking about not just the good of the synod and what's coming, but even the challenges that we see. And he says there are certain temptations that we have as Christians. Now he's speaking, of course, to all those of the synod, primarily the bishops. But he says there are various temptations that come up that we have to struggle against as Christians, as Catholics who follow Christ. And I'm going to mention just two of them. He put forth five. So I'm just going to mention two of them. He says, one temptation is a hostile inflexibility. A hostile inflexibility. That is, wanting to close oneself within the written word, within the letter, and not allowing oneself to be surprised by God, the God of surprises, the Spirit. So the temptation to this hostile inflexibility is also inflexibility within the law, within the certitude of what we know, and not of what we still need to learn, what we need to achieve. From the time of Christ, it is the temptation of the zealous, of the scrupulous, of the solicitous, and of the so-called traditionalists, and also of the intellectuals. So the Holy Father is pointing out that one of the problems we have in the church are so-called traditionalists or intellectuals, those who are so fixated on the letter of the law, they become inflexible and even hostile. And he said this is a temptation that is from the beginning. The church has always struggled with this temptation. But he also tells us of another temptation, to a destructive tendency of goodness. So a destructive tendency to goodness. So the intention is goodness, but it's destructive. That in the name of a deceptive mercy, I'm saying this isn't true mercy, a deceptive mercy will bind the wounds without first curing them. So this mercy binds wounds without trying to cure the wound or treat it. It treats the symptoms and not the causes or the roots of the problem. It is the temptation of the do-gooders, of the fearful, and also of the so-called progressives and liberals. He says, okay, these aren't the traditionalists, these are the liberals. These are those who are so concerned with what they understand to be mercy and goodness that they're willing to not even try to cure the real ailment in someone's life. They just want to patch over it, make them feel better. Now again, he brings up other temptations, but these two, the first two he begins with, are really a stark contrast that we often see in the church, among bishops, among faithful. The extremes that we can take. Either it's the law and nothing else, the letter of the law and nothing else. This absolute fixation on, inflexible tradition. Now, tradition is good. He goes on to reference that we are rooted in the tradition of the faith, that which is handed on to us. But it is an inflexible tradition, a scrupulosity, which ends up failing in mercy and compassion and love. You should know better. You have the laws. Why can't you follow them? I do. What's your problem? You just don't care. That's your problem. Don't make me come out and deal with you. I'm not going to go out of my way if you won't come and obey. That's the temptation of those who are fixated on the law and tradition. Again, the law is good, the tradition is good, but it's a hostile inflexibility. But then again, we have the other extreme. Now, we don't necessarily all fall into these extremes, but it's good to look. The other extreme is, again, as he, in quotes, says the progressives and the liberals. These are people who have on their mind compassion and mercy. Right? The traditionalists have on their mind the truth. God stated the truth. But they can go too far and neglect mercy. And then you have the liberals who go to the other extreme. Mercy and love. Jesus would not have made them follow this law. Jesus would not have made them do this. No, laws change over time. We just need to help people feel accepted. We just need to make sure that they're part of the community. That we're there for them in their need. No matter of their choices or their lifestyle. No matter of whether they're really following the tradition or not. And he calls this a false mercy. Because it's not bringing any healing into their wounded lives. It's just patching over their wounds. Putting a Band-Aid over a pierced heart. He says both of these are wrong. And we have to know, brothers and sisters, that the devil loves to push us to extremes. Whether extreme mercy, that becomes false compassion, or extreme justice, or the law, which loses all mercy and love. The truth, or what we call orthodoxy, that which stands true in following Christ, is both truth and love, right? It's not truth neglecting love and mercy and compassion. It's not love neglecting truth and the law and what is given. Remember this, brothers and sisters. Truth without mercy, compassion, and love, without patience and gentleness, is a lie. It is no truth at all. But love or mercy and compassion without the law, without the truth that is given to us that we are to follow and strive to conform to, is not love. It's just selfishness. Self-love. No love of God. In fact, it does more. Again, we must be orthodox. We must stand in the center, seeking to follow the tradition that has been handed on to us for 2,000 years. The moral laws that the scriptures, the teachings of the church and the fathers have always attested to. To conform, yes, to the great best of our ability, to the laws of Christ and His church that have been handed on to us, while maintaining compassion, mercy, understanding, patience for those who struggle with the law, who struggle with the truth. Like Christ, we have to be willing, who follow Him in the truth, to go out to the sinner. Not just to say, well, you got to come to me. We have to be willing to reach out to them, to go into their lives and to try to bring them back through acts of love and compassion and mercy. I mean, think about it as Catholics. If we only fed the poor who, were Catholic, what kind of Catholics would we be? Well, I'm sorry. They don't have food because they're not following Jesus. Where's the love and mercy in that? But it's not just about the food. Compassion itself. Patience with sinners. We're all sinners. Not a one of us follows the truth as we should. But the devil wants to get us either to either extreme. Again, this traditionalism that becomes inflexible and hostile, or this liberalism that neglects the tradition of the faith and the laws of Christ and His church. We follow Christ, which means, if we're Orthodox and standing in the center, there are going to be traditionalists who don't like us, who think we're too liberal. And there's going to be liberals who think we're too traditional. We're too fixated on the law and tradition. Even Christ himself was contradicted by both sides. Now that's not easy to find. It's not easy to hold to Christ, His laws, the traditions, while maintaining compassion and mercy. It is difficult to be in the middle, to be orthodox. The church must be united in Christ. In Christ. And what is the first thing that the Lord tells us in the gospel today? You must love God with your whole mind, heart, and soul. That is the greatest of the commandments. That means I have to love God more than I love you. I have to put God before I put you. God always comes first. His teachings come first. Worship of Him comes first. Following Him always comes first, before everything else. Before myself, before you, children, work, whatever. God comes first, which is why we follow the law of God. The law of God first. But what is the second commandment? The second greatest commandment, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets are contained in these two commandments. Love God first and totally, and love your neighbor as yourself. What does it mean to love one's neighbor as oneself? If you see that your neighbor is drinking poison, and you don't say anything, you're at fault for their death, aren't you? Now, they may still drink the poison. They may think you're crazy and disregard what you're saying. But you have no love for them if you don't point out their erroneous actions and ways that are doing harm. Now, you must do it with love and compassion and understanding. But to fail to point that out is just as sinful. Because I hope that other people would point out my failures, my lack of following Christ, my lack of compassion at times. Because if you love me, then you want me to follow Jesus. You want me to follow the first command. If I'm not following the first command, you need to try to help me do it. Pray for me, encourage me, remind me. You know, Father, that wasn't very good what you did. You shouldn't do it. Correction is an act of love. And I hope that people correct me when I do wrong, just as I try to correct them when they do wrong, because I love you. Because I don't want you to live in sin and far from Christ. What does St. Paul say in the end of our second reading today? He's talking about, of course, as always, us following Christ. But he talks about Jesus is the only one who delivers us from the coming wrath. That's a very powerful word. Why is there wrath that is coming upon us? If God is love of compassion and mercy. Because He's also a God of truth. And wrath is the just consequence of those who do not follow the truth. It's not one or the other, brothers and sisters. It's not truth or mercy. It's truth in mercy. And remember, we do not follow anyone in this world. We don't necessarily take our opinions and draw lines in the sand. I'm on this side, you're on that side. We follow Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life.